I think that there's just also some like business strategy, like more like very just practical reasons as to why we may not want to get into the development of hardware. The short answer is that it's really hard, right? Like it's really hard to exist within the hardware space. It's expensive. The 800-pound gorilla in the room is Apple, not just because they have incredible hardware, but the distribution around the world is just insane. So if we were to invest money in making a camera, even if it's better than Apple somehow, which I struggle to see how a lot of companies would compete, you would then have to solve for the distribution. Like, how do you get it in the hands of hundreds of millions of people? That's hard. And so I think there's a business strategy as to like why we want to be agnostic. I think we'll kind of let folks compete in that space. And in many ways, we don't want to necessarily get in the business of selling cameras, but what we do want to be in the business of is, regardless of what camera you use, whether it's an iPhone or a Matterport or a Faro or Navras or Leica, or, I'm sure Apple is also going to have even more powerful LiDAR based on the kind of the new headsets that they're putting out. We'll kind of let that play out and see what happens. But what we do want is to make sure that we're at the center of making it possible for all of those folks scanning with whatever camera to send us their 3D scan, and for us to be able to provide them accurate 3D and 2D information about their buildings that they're scanning. Part of us getting to having a few more drops in the bucket is making sure that we're not limiting ourselves to one or two different cameras. We should expect that, like, in the coming 5-10 years, there will be a lot more competition in different cameras that we haven't even heard of, simply, again, because as LiDAR gets cheaper, more accessible, we should expect even a lot more competition on the hardware space. It's an important, super important piece of the puzzle. I can't stress that enough, but it's a really hard space to compete in. You might have heard me talk about the oil industry and like how the parallels, and of course the ironies is not lost to me about crude oil and refined oil, and like, our talk about the environment, but this has happened before. A little bit of a history buff, like, John Rockefeller, when he, I guess when he was navigating the waters of the discovery of oil in Pennsylvania and what to do about it, the early companies focused on building hardware, right? Extraction equipment to drill into the ground and get oil out of that ground. It was really expensive and really risky, because if you built something, you put it down and you got it wrong, it's almost, you were guaranteed to go bankrupt. So it was a very risky, very costly endeavor. Now, of course, if you got it right, then you got it right, and you're likely drilling a lot of oil. That process saw a ton of companies go bankrupt because of that risk. Instead, I think what Rockefeller ended up doing was just focusing on, okay, well, I have no idea who's going to win in the extraction plants, but what we do know is that we could take crude oil and convert it into other things of value that people are paying for, kerosene, and then, of course, all the derivative products, from plastics to gasoline, et cetera. And so by focusing on the refinement process, they were able to kind of become almost the best in the world at the refinement process. In many ways, the kind of parallels is the same. It's like, one is like, how do you capture 3D scan data in its crude form? And in its crude form, it's not very useful. But once you convert it to like 3D information, 2D information, it all of a sudden has very real use cases that people are using and paying for right now. Of course, as history plays out, like he got, I think the Standard Oil Company got really good at refinement. And then, of course, as these companies went bankrupt, the kind of refinement process kind of bought the refineries anyway, kind of after the fact, bought the extraction companies, et cetera. Now, I'm not promoting monopolies or anything like that, but the stories have played out in other industries as well, where it's like this kind of extraction process and refinement process. And in our case, we just want to get really, really good at, creating the most accurate 3D and 2D information as possible, and making sure that we're partnering with, all the different 3D scanning cameras out there in the world.